Hello, McFleet. We are back with another quickie solo episode of McFly's Movie House. I hope you are all alert. I hope you are all awake because today I'm breaking down some of my favorite anxiety inducing or stressful movies that I like turning to when, I don't know, when I'm feeling like I need a little bit of that adrenaline kick in my system, you know? And if you followed me on Instagram or TikTok for a while, then you know that I sometimes chat about movies like this. So while I may have picked some familiar selects that some of you know I enjoy, I tried freshening up this list a bit. So what does that mean? It means that I'll be omitting some classics that I've yapped about to death, but that I still recommend you check out, like George Slizer's The Vanishing from 1988, which is truly chilling stuff, or Andrei Zulawski's Possession. I also feel like Possession has been or has seen a bit of a resurgence in the past few years. By the way, did you guys hear that Paramount is closing deals with Robert Pattinson and Parker Finn, the director behind Smile, to tackle a remake of Possession? I was honestly kind of floored by this news, and I'm curious by the time this episode comes out if we'll get any developments. But I don't know who else can rival Isabelle Adjani's descent into terror and madness in that one scene. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. But anyway, for today, I decided to avoid some obvious picks. Like, I'm not going to include the stressful classics everyone turns to, like Good Time or Uncut Gems. Shout out to the Safdie brothers' anxiety ridden cinematic universe, or movies like Whiplash or The Shining. And I'm also going to avoid zombie slash virus movies like Train to Busan, 28 Days Later, and Wreck, just because I think that's kind of unfair. I don't know. Whenever I see a fast zombie in a movie, that's just enough to give me like borderline a panic attack. So maybe I'll do a favorite zombie movie list for another day. Actually, that's a great idea. Lastly, I also want to preface this by saying that this is just what stresses me out. But as you all know, what's stressful to me may not be stressful to you, and vice versa. I actually have a quick and funny little tidbit to share. I once told one of my closest friends to watch this movie, and I said to her, "Oh, it's so sweet and wonderful, and it's filled with this childlike whimsy." And so she watches it, and halfway through the film, I get a text from her that just says, "What the hell, Marta? This is so anxiety inducing." And then the more I thought about it, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I can see that." And that movie, by the way, was Abbas Kiarostami's Where is the Friend's House? So let me know if you find that one stressful. But all of this to say, people get stressed out by different things. So without further ado, here are my 10 picks that get my blood pumping. So first one on the list is very much so a fast paced movie. It is the first in a fantastic trilogy as well, and that is Nicholas Winding Refn's Pusher from 1996. This also happens to be Refn's film debut, actually, and it also marks the film debut of Mads Mikkelsen, who then later gets a bigger role in the second Pusher film. And he's just fantastic here as well. This is just iconic Danish cinema, I think. And so, what is Pusher about? It is a crime thriller that introduces us to two Copenhagen based drug dealers. Our lead is Frank, played by Kim Bodnia, and Tony, who is Mikkelsen's role. And so we discover that Frank is in debt to a vicious mob boss, played to perfection by Zlatko Buric. And he then gets a chance to properly shine in the third Pusher film, which also happens to be my favorite in the trilogy, but it's less stressful than this one, which is why I went with the first one. So Frank is in debt to Milo, and Milo essentially gives him a large amount of heroin to sell. And Frank is determined to, pay off his debts by selling all of this product. Yet, of course, things don't go according to plan. And now they basically have to scramble to come up with the money or say goodbye to their kneecaps. Fantastic. So, yeah, Pusher is a great film, particularly for fans of Refn's work. I urge you to check it out because it's so different to the hyper stylized movies he'd make later on, like Drive, for example. He shows us this criminal underbelly with guerrilla style filmmaking, and your heart just races as you watch this shaky camera follow our two leads, who are, by the way, just panicked and running around. And what's interesting is that Refn shot this way not really by choice, but because of two reasons. Reason one, because of Danish union rules, Refn wasn't allowed to shoot more than 8 hours of filming per day and no filming on weekends. And reason two, he actually had an incredibly small budget. And Pusher left him broke. And so that was the reason he went on to do two sequels to make more money. And lo and behold, I mean, look at his career now. So Pusher, it's gritty, it's visceral. Check it out. Next up, my number two pick is going to go to a very mean spirited movie that is not for the faint of heart because it's just cruel, really. And that's Michael Haneke's Funny Games from 1997. I'm going to go with the Austrian original, not the American remake that Haneke basically did shot for shot, which is cool, definitely, but we're going to do the original around these parts. So, what is Funny Games about, you may ask? The movie follows a, I would say, upper middle class family who has just arrived to their vacation home. And their scenic bliss is interrupted with the arrival of two young men who take them hostage very quickly and then force them to play these sadistic games. And these games just get worse and worse. And to make matters even more messed up, there isn't really a reason for why these guys are such monsters. And so, while this can come off as a simple premise, it's so effective. And Haneke really messes with his audience too, which is how that anxiety builds in your system. Because as the film goes on, you just have that overwhelming sense of dread, and that just grows and grows and grows inside of you. Funny Games is as well very restrained. It has this bleak color palette and it just looks realistic, or raw, I should say. And it's not a pretty film. It's just uncomfortable. And to really show zero mercy to his audience, Haneke does something shocking. And for those of you who want to go in blind, skip ahead a minute or two because slight spoilers ahead. But he takes this meta approach by allowing our two villains in the movie to break the fourth wall multiple times throughout the film, which initially comes as a total surprise. And Haneke did this to comment on the thriller or horror genre and the public's fascination with violence on screen. He's even said that the entire film shouldn't be seen as a horror film, but a message about violence in the media and how pointless it is, which speaks to the pointlessness of the actions we see committed on camera in this movie. And I don't want to give away major shockers in the film that involve this, but basically, just know that Haneke breaks conventions that we come to expect for a traditional thriller, which in turn only makes this that much more disturbing and definitely stressful. So there you go. Alrighty, this brings us to number three. And for this one, I decided to go with a recent watch of mine. It's actually a film that after I finished watching it, I was like, oh my God, I'm so tense. Let's do an episode on stressful movies. And that is Rodrigo Sorogoyen's The Beasts from 2022. This was recommended to me by a friend of mine. I hadn't heard of it at all, but it was playing on Mubi. So I figured, let's give it a whirl. And man, this made me so tense. So let me just describe it quickly. The Beasts takes us to a seemingly picturesque Galician countryside where we meet a French couple who has settled there, Antoine and Olga. Antoine is actually played by Denis Ménochet, who some of you may remember as Monsieur Lapadite from the opening scene of Inglourious Basterds. We meet them and they're settled into their new life as farmers in this small village, and they're older, they're well-traveled, they're educated, but they're now in the later years of their lives and they want to settle down and sell organic produce because they want a relaxing life. And in their spare time, they also fix up crumbling houses in the village, not for profit, but just to make them livable again. And so all of this to say they're good people, but they're met with hostility from the locals who live there. And since Antoine and Olga have voted against the installation of these wind turbines in town, that's upset the locals because it would actually generate income for them and allow them to finally gain money and to do something, anything else with their lives other than be farmers. And these are people who are poor, they don't have much, they've lived in this village their whole lives, and it's generations of families of farmers. And basically, quite literally, right off the bat of this movie, which is, by the way, 2 hours and 17 minutes long, but right away, you just know that this film is not going to end well. You get to spend those 2 hours in a stressful clench. Antoine, more so than Olga, is met with hostility right away. And this only gets worse and worse to the point where it feels suffocating. And what's interesting about this film, and I think is so clever, is that as the story progresses, our antagonists get more terrifying, sure, and yet you come to this realization that they kind of raise a valid complaint as well. As I've said, they've toiled away in poverty for generations. Of course they want a chance at a better life. Does this excuse their actions? Absolutely not. But it leaves you with a lot to chew on. And actually, in a press release, Sorogoyen shared that he finds justice interesting because he says it's not indisputable, it's relative. So, without justifying the behavior of the antagonists, he understood their frustration and their hatred. Side note, Louis Zahara, who plays the leading antagonist neighbor, he is incredible here. And he will make you feel so uneasy because he looks like he's going to burst at any given moment. He's terrifying. And Menochet also gives a fantastic performance as a man that's just so beat down and frustrated by this. It's a great film. It also happens to be based loosely on a true story, except it was a Dutch couple, not French. You can look that up yourself. So that's my third pick. All right, number 4 on my stressful movie list. This one will be familiar for those of you who know me, but I just got to go with it. It's truly a film that it's up there for me in terms of anxiety levels with Uncut Gems or Good Time, and that's 2018's Climax by Gaspar Noé. Honestly, I could have picked so many options from his filmography. That man just knows how to get you. But I went with Climax because I think that the premise is unique, and coupled with the incredible music and the way it's shot, it is just a panic attack for an hour and 37 minutes. Hooray. So, for those of you who haven't seen Climax, the premise is really simple. We're introduced to an incredibly talented dance troupe who are practicing the routine in an empty school, I think it is. It's a big building that's empty. I think it's a school. And once they're done with their rehearsal, it's time to unwind and party. And so, what do they have for refreshments? They have a lot of sangria. However, someone has laced the sangria with a lot, and I mean a lot of LSD, which in turn basically makes their night one that's just living hell, truly. Now, what do I like about this film? As I said, very simple plot. But what Noé does is he makes this an experience. The whole film looks and feels like a hallucinatory panic attack, which is exactly the point, since it's showing how these dancers feel. And the opening is great because we see them dance. Also, just their routines are phenomenal in this movie. Like, it's truly hypnotic to watch this choreography. But as they're dancing, they pause, they drink some sangria, and then they start dancing again. And as they take part in this dance off, let's call it, their choreography becomes increasingly more dangerous and bizarre. Noé also hired a contortionist from Congo that he flew in, and you see the dance moves he does. Oh, and so this escalation is very subtle. But next thing you know, you're watching this and you're like, oh, are the drugs kicking in now for them? How about now? And it just grows, and you get uncomfortable. And then to add to the panic, we're presented with these single and long takes. There's one that's notably between 40 to 42 minutes long. And we just watch this camera function like it has a mind of its own. It whips towards the ceiling, then it plunges to the floor, all while you're watching these visuals, which are these neon hues. You get that pounding electronic score that does not stop. Honestly, it's so stressful. It's borderline nauseating, but it's an experience, like I said. And if you want a stressful experience, look no further. So I promise you that I included some picks in here that aren't as mean spirited as some of these, but we're not going to get to those just yet. I'm so sorry. This next one is probably just as nasty as Funny Games. Maybe more so, actually. I don't know. You tell me. But it's also from Austria. Surprise. What's going on in Austria? Who knows? I'm kidding. That's Cargill's Angst from 1983. This is a film that I watched. It stressed me out so much. It did what it set out to do. But will I watch it again? Probably not for a very long time. And what's so disturbing about this one is that it's actually based on the real life mass murderer Werner Kniesik. And it was so disturbing at the time that it was released. It was actually banned in many European countries. It did effectively ruin Cargill's career, which is a shame because the movie really does feature a fantastic way to tell a story through the camera work, but also through our lead's performance. The lead is played by Erwin Leder, whom I remember as one of the crew members in Das Boot, if you've seen that, which came out around the same time as this, give or take a few years. But so Angst follows a psychopath recently released from prison, and he wanders into a home he thinks is empty, and inside he finds a disabled man. Shortly after that, the man's mother and sister arrive. And that's when the panic starts because in real time, we watch as he goes on this spree. And on the surface, this sounds like a classic home invasion movie, but you get this very real characterization of our lead. We enter his mind through his inner monologue, and the film itself is presented through very tight close ups and overhead crane shots. So we're just glued to him throughout the entire runtime, immersed in what he's doing. And it's truly sickening. This isn't an antagonist who's charming. I say that in quotation marks, but someone like Hannibal Lecter. Not at all. This is just a primitive and violent and disturbed man, and that is the point. Angst does not romanticize the lead character like how some horror movies do. You know what I mean? It's just grotesque. And I think this movie was incredibly influential in the home invasion genre. I think that within its simplicity, only strengthened by, like I said, the dialogue, the camera work, the usage of sound. It's all very effective and makes for a film that, yeah, it's just stressful. So consider this your warning, I guess. So this now brings us to number 6, I believe. I'm going to go with a film by Shinya Tsukamoto, who is perhaps best known for the bonkers and very metal Tetsuo the Iron Man from 1989. Could also be considered a stressful movie now that I think about it, but I'm going to go with another one of his films. This one is more modern. It's from 2011, and that is Kotoko. Shout out to my former guest, Seth, for putting this on my radar. This is a very interesting film. It's one that's undoubtedly stressful, yet it's filled with so much compassion for our lead character. So let's get into it. Kotoko is a single mother. She has an infant son, yet she struggles to take care of him because she's suffering from something called double vision. And this essentially causes her to hallucinate doubles of people that she meets. And these doubles are terrifying. The things she sees are brutal. And so Kotoko struggles with her day to day life. Things get even more out of hand. And the only time she believes that these hallucinations stop are when she sings. And she has a beautiful voice. Actually, Kotoko is played by a J-pop star, Coco, who approached Tsukamoto with this story. And anyway, she has this terrible episode one day in the film, which causes her to lose her son. He's placed in the care of her sister, I think it is. And I don't want to say more besides the fact that she befriends a man too. This man is played by Tsukamoto himself. And yeah, just watch it. It's a phenomenal film. These hallucinations that Kotoko has are, like I said, very horrific. They're very stressful. There are some scenes that are very hard to stomach, no doubt. And Tsukamoto even makes this worse for you as you're watching since the camera is so shaky. The editing is very disorienting because the entire time you're sitting there and you're like, holy shit, is what's happening on screen really happening? Or is it one of her hallucinations? You're just as confused as Kotoko. And it's an experience. And yet at the same time, it's a movie that has a lot of compassion for our lead. Clearly, she is unwell, and the movie takes care to really make you feel for her. She's not a quote unquote evil person. She's very much so struggling. And it's a film that, yeah, it's bold and it's difficult to sit through, but it's very respectful with its portrayal of mental health struggles. So, yeah, exhausting film, but one that I believe is so powerful as well. Okay, gang, it's time for the final film on this list that takes part in that chunk of cruel hearted, anxiety inducing movies. It's our number 7 entry, and I'm going to go with a Thomas Vinterberg film. And there were a few here I could have picked. He has multiple anxiety inducing entries. I was almost going to pick The Celebration, but I decided to go with The Hunt from 2012, a movie that is so frustrating. You just want to scream at the screen, enter the screen, and shake the people that are in the film. Truly. This also happens to be another movie on this list with Mads Mikkelsen. And this time he's in the starring role. He is just incredible in this film. So let me tell you what it's about. It's around late fall in a Danish village. We're introduced to Lucas, played by Mikkelsen, and he is divorced. He is also a kindergarten teacher. He's beloved by his community. He has friends. He has a teenage son. His students love him. His colleagues love him. What could possibly go wrong, you may ask? Well, we discover that Lucas's best friend's daughter, a very young girl, has a crush on him. And of course, he tries his best to, let her down gently. Even that feels weird to say, but he tries explaining to her that it's inappropriate. She's also a student in his kindergarten class. And of course, she's a little girl. She doesn't know better, but she's hurt. And so what does she do? She accuses him of sexually abusing her. And this now starts a chain reaction that leads to what essentially becomes a manhunt. He's completely ostracized from his once warm community. It's terrible. It is truly terrible. And you feel such anger and frustration as you watch this. I can guarantee you. But it's also a timely film as well, because it's one that shows how misinformation and this mob mentality can only grow and how dangerous that is. And in an interview with Slant Magazine, Winterberg mentioned something that stuck with me. He said that once you say something, it's done and you can't take that back. And he compared this to social media platforms where words travel so fast. And truly, when something like this happens, even if it's not true, it can haunt someone for the rest of their lives. It stays with them. And that's so terrifying to think of. What a world we live in, right? So, yeah, as I promised, no more stressful downers. Now I'm going to present you with only stressful movies. And this next one, this contains a scene that I was gasping for air. I was sweating. I was screaming at the TV because, man, this is an experience. And I'm going to go with William Friedkin's 1977 panic attack, Sorcerer. Now, Sorcerer is an adaptation of a 1950 French novel by Georges Arnaud called The Wages of Fear. Now, for those of you who know, The Wages of Fear was also adapted into a movie in 1953 by Henri-Georges Clouzot. It had the same name. And if we're going to be comparing that film to Sorcerer, I would say that The Wages of Fear is overall the better film. The characters are more fleshed out. You also kind of root for them more, I would say. But I think in terms of pure anxiety, I would say that Sorcerer makes me feel more unwell. So that's why I went with it today. But honestly, just watch both. The Wages of Fear is just a classic. It also happens to be one of the movies I gave away when I first watched McFly's Movie House. The memories. But anyway, let's break down Sorcerer really quick. We meet four men from different backgrounds and different parts of the globe. They all meet in this South American village. And there they are assigned to transport cargoes of dynamite across the jungle. However, there's always a however, am I right? But the reason why this is so dangerous is because the cargo is a very unstable ingredient, and that is nitroglycerin. Now, just imagine riding through the jungle, through this wilderness, in these massive trucks with an unstable ingredient like that, where you don't know if any bumps in the road will basically blow you up. And at one point in the movie, the moment that I mentioned took years off of my life, that's when they have to cross this janky ass rope bridge that looks like it's falling apart in a monsoon. Oh my God, just thinking about it, I want to vomit. Not to mention that there wasn't any CGI or miniatures. This was all shot for real. So, I mean, wow, it is a masterclass in anxiety cinema. I will stand by that wholeheartedly. You also have that banging little score by the legendary Tangerine Dream. So it's just an experience. It's also worthwhile noting how troubled this production was too. Friedkin said that almost everything they did in this movie was life-threatening. And there were about 50 people who had to leave the film either due to injuries or gangrene or food poisoning or malaria. Friedkin himself got malaria and lost 50 pounds. It was just rough. But we got Sorcerer out of it, and Sorcerer rules. Come to think of it, I should probably do an entire episode on this movie because there's so much to chat about this and the production, but I don't have time right now. So if you want that, let me know. I'm up for the challenge. All right. Two more to go. Number 9 goes to a Martin Scorsese film that I adore, and that's 1985's After Hours, a Kafka-esque nightmare that is so disorienting, your eyeballs will just be glued to the screen with all of the insane events that are happening. Truly, it just left me speechless the first time I watched it. It is a surrealist classic. Griffin Dunne plays Paul, a data entry clerk in Manhattan who is bored with his day-to-day grind. He one day meets the alluring Marcy at a cafe. She's played by Rosanna Arquette. And she tells him she lives in Soho with her sculptor roommate, Kiki. And I'm not going to get too into it, but she gives him her number. He ends up making an excuse and calling her and wanting to visit her. So he makes the trek to Soho at night, and that's when things get weird. And the whole film basically revolves around Paul trying to get back home, but things keep getting in the way over and over again, and his misfortunes just get worse. After Hours is a lot of fun. It's a black comedy, no doubt, but it's also a film that's incredibly frustrating because things are so nonsensical and stressful, and Paul just wants to get home, but he's stuck in these absurd situations. And what's interesting about the film is there's a lot of comparisons to The Wizard of Oz. And actually, what I love is the way Paul gets stuck in Soho is kind of similar to Dorothy. As we all know, a tornado whisks Dorothy out of Kansas. And with Paul, his adventures start in a yellow cab. Yellow brick road, hint, hint. But as the car is driving there at night, it's this crazy high-speed cab ride. Paul is being swerved and tossed and spun around, much like if he was in a tornado. And lo and behold, it's the wind that blows his money out the window, the money that was supposed to get him home later. So again, tornadoes, wind, see what I mean? And he keeps going from rabbit hole to rabbit hole. So the whole film feels like a Kafka story meets The Wizard of Oz meets Alice in Wonderland. It's just fantastic. This is another film that would benefit from an entire episode because there's so much to chat about here. From how this movie came to be, while Scorsese was struggling to get funding for The Last Temptation of Christ, and he himself was at an incredibly rough and infuriating period of his life. There's also the on-set tales about how he made Griffin Dunne be celibate for the duration of the shoot so he could have all this pent-up energy inside him. Just so much. So yeah, After Hours stressed me out. I also adore this movie to bits, and it's one of my favorites in Scorsese's filmography. And lastly, it's a film that I talk about so much online. I love it so much. I think it's a great example of what you can do with a movie that's basically set in one small space. And it's a short film, it's just over an hour long, but with a strong script and strong performances, you can do so much. And that's Emma Seligman's Shiva Baby from 2020, which is actually based on her short film of the same name. And that short film was her school grad project, if you can believe it. I love this film. It contains my favorite role by Rachel Sennett to date and really put her on the map for me when I first saw it. And I've loved watching her success grow. So Shiva Baby. Sennett plays Danielle. She's kind of a directionless college graduate. She has a sugar daddy, Max, and she sees him briefly before going to meet up with her parents to go to a Shiva that also has all of her family and friends there, not to mention her ex-girlfriend who is also there. And the anxiety starts as soon as she arrives. It begins to feel like a modern take on The Graduate, where she gets there and she gets accosted by all these people that know her, and they're like, what are you going to do with your life? What do you have going on? Etc., etc. And it's frustrating when you're either finishing school or fresh out of school, and my God, just leave me alone. Ugh. So that's what's going on. Her ex-girlfriend also isn't that kind to her either. And then as all this is happening, suddenly, drum roll please, her sugar daddy, his wife, and their infant child all arrive to this Shiva. Let that sink in. It's a recipe for disaster. There's one scene that involves a misplaced phone. We know that the phone is misplaced. Danielle does not know that it is misplaced. And this situation leads to me, personally, trying to refrain from not having a panic attack. It's a film that also effectively uses its story and suffocatingly cramped location to its advantage. It's fantastic. I honestly even consider this somewhat of a horror movie because of the level of discomfort that I feel throughout this. It genuinely feels like a family gathering from hell. I think that Seligman has a knack for writing comedy. Within that, Sennett is also incredible at delivering her lines. Not even just the lines, but she's really great at her delivery. You can see how frustrated she is behind every fake smile, every twitch. It's just a fantastic performance from her, and I want more people to see it. So yeah, that's it, my friends. You got 10 stressful movies from me. We started off kind of dark, I know, but then we ended with some lighthearted stress, let's call it. So perhaps, if you're going to be tackling these, line up something fun and relaxing after that, maybe a timeless comedy, a comfy classic. I know for me, I always turn to a movie like Tampopo to unwind. So Maybe I'll even do that today. So until next time, thanks for hanging out. Let me know on socials what your favorite anxiety movies are. And that's that. See you guys.